Welcome back to the Everlasting Way YouTube channel. Yahweh. We just finished up part 6 of Who is Israel and just recording the same day, so I'm going to jump right into part 7. So previously we had discussed how the possibility of Daniel chapter 7 is the lion represents the nation Great Britain, or the kingdom Great Britain, and the eagle's wings, which are part of the lion's kingdom because we came out of Great Britain as the United States. So we discussed that possibility. We also talked about simply how Daniel chapter 7 talks about how the traditional view talks about how the bear represents the Medes and the Persians, and the leopard of Daniel chapter 7 represents Greece. We also see this with Daniel chapter 2 when it's describing the metals of gold for Babylon, silver for the Medes and Pers, I believe brass for Greece, and iron for Rome. And the challenge with this, I explained in the last video, was that no one reads Daniel chapter 8, verse 20 and 21, where the Father actually defines who the Medes and the Pers represent. They actually represent a different beast, the ram. And Greece is not represented by the leopard, but the male goat is in Daniel chapter 8, verse 20 and 21. And I showed you how we're not making that up. The ram's identity being the Medes and the Persians, and the goat's identity being the Greeks, Yavan, as in Greek. Now, that being said, that means that there's a different interpretation for Daniel, and it's for a different time of when that prophecy would be fulfilled, meaning that the kingdoms that would be representative of Daniel chapter 7, chapter 2, chapter 8, other chapters in Daniel and in the book of Revelation are all the same, and that they would be the kingdoms that are on the earth at Mashiach's return. So we went through and showed how, just through symbolism, other countries that could possibly be, for example, the lion represented, in this example, represented as Great Britain, the seal of Great Britain, and the gigantic, humongous Trafalgar Square lions in London. We went through other symbolism that the lion and other symbols used for other nations are together. For example, here's the United States as an eagle, commonly known, and then Great Britain as the lion, dressed up as a World War I veteran. We see the study continued, and then we saw as Daniel's prophecy says that he watched and beheld until the eagle's wings were plucked from the lion, meaning that the eagle, the kingdom or the nation that came out of the lion, was once a part of the lion. And we show that this is representative of the United States. It also says that that lion had the heart of a man, and we clearly showed how the United States is representative of Uncle Sam. In that symbolism, the federal government represents a man named Uncle Sam against those initials from the United States. So U.S. Uncle Sam. And then we talked about how the similarities between those two. Now what we want to do is go to Daniel chapter 7, verse 5, where it says that, behold, another beast, a second, like a bear, was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth. And they said to the bear, arise, devour much flesh. Now, if you go back to just previously where we studied the bear, we talked about the possibility where the bear, let's see, being the Medes and the Persians, and the alliance of the Medes and the Persians together their two kingdoms came together and overthrew Babylon, who was representative of the lion in the traditional prophecy view of this. And the bear raising up on its side meant that the Persians were stronger than um, uh, the Medes in the relationship or the alliance. So one was more powerful than the other, and that the three ribs were representative of the devouring of the provinces of Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Well, Greece, the Greeks also conquered Egypt, but there's no ribs that are mentioned as a part of that. So there's some gaps in this one too. So when we look at just representative of the bear, I think a more probable explanation for a kingdom that would exist on the in the earth or on as a nation or a kingdom would be representative of the symbolism used for the kingdom of Russia. Now, this one's a little bit easier. I think they're all easy, but this one's really easy in the fact that, uh, we have a lot of symbolism for Russia in the bear, both satirical and comedy, cartoon, as well as political. And I'm going to show you just a couple examples of that. But it really is common knowledge that the Russia's symbol is the bear. Here's an example of that. Time magazine um, created this headline. And again, these are not digital. This is an artist representation. So an artist has the eagle and the uh, bear staring at the globe, which is on fire from all the wars that are taking place, with a stick of dynamite in the middle of it, saying, "Will it explode? Will the Middle East again explode? Because look where the dynamite's located in the Middle East region." So we had the Middle East erupting into war again, and this is around 1980, October 27th, 1980, specifically within that Time magazine article. But it's on the cover, and I talked about how this symbolism is prophetic. Um, Another satirical cartoon from a popular magazine, and even modern day cartoon drawings. Like I put one in here just to show you, like this is so commonplace now. But in the middle here, we do have Russia, and then this deck of cards is I showed from this like I believe it's World War I era popular magazine publishing called Puck. But it's showing basically Russia, the bear. Notice the bear has a crown, okay, and it represents the kingdom. And what we have is the playing deck here, and I'll blow this up a little bit so you can see the names. But of course, they're the countries that were in basically in the target sites for Russia to invade and take. Um, and then modern day cartoon, we show just from a Pinterest cartoon. You have again Uncle Sam represented by the United States, red, white, and blue, and then you have him playing a game of Risk or whatever, World Dominion, type game with the bear, Russia, and you can clearly see the sickle. We'll talk about the sickle a little bit later, some of that meaning, how it ties into some other symbolism in this chapter. So it doesn't matter if it's 1980 or even older World War I area or modern day Pinterest. It's easily recognizable that the bear represents Russia. So there's other evidence, and I mentioned this. We're going to see this in other nations, but the bear that all the nations use their symbolism in all their military. Um, uh, the Russians have used the bear symbol. Here you can see it on a T-34 85 World War II tank. The symbolism is there, on the coat of arms of the Soviet 36 Guard Tank Brigade. Okay, so it's coat of arms on the gun turret of the tank. Again, it's symbolism for the nation and its power. Now, I think what is more probable in this view or this interpretation of Daniel is that unlike the traditional view where the bear rising up on one side is simply the Medes and the Persians, basically their two governments battling it out to determine who would ultimately become the greatest kingdom after they conquer the Babylons together. I think a more probable view of this is that if you were to look at a map, and if you were to look at the Soviet Union, and I'll pull up a picture to show this, if you look at a map and you look at the Soviet Union and you look to the left, so the prophecy is on the one side, the bear was raised up to one side. If you look to the left, you're going to see that for 50 years after World War II, okay, Russia has always been the aggressor against nations on one side of her. Okay, and that's easy to see in this picture. You can see Russia controlled East Germany, it controlled Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Albania, and even in modern times, it has started war against Ukraine. There's a reason for this. The scripture talks about how Russia will take back the territories that it lost before uh, during the end time. So it remains to be seen if Ukraine actually wins this war or if Russia takes back territory that it lost, some to the Chinese and some to the Eastern Bloc, or to say it that way. So this brings us to the three ribs that are mentioned in the text. Now, can we be certain in this interpretation that it's, another example of this is we know Russia basically took by force three major provinces from China. Um, and China and Russia continue to fight over today, even modern times, those three provinces. And they are Manchuria, Mongolia, and Saigon. So I think the most telling trait, though, that Yahweh uses to describe the bear is this. It says that the bear would arise and devour much flesh. Now, if you consider the damage and power of the communist forces at work as a direct result of Russian influence, I mean, come on. As a result, you're looking at socialist thinking that has infiltrated to the four corners of the earth. It really reminds me of a scripture about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. One in particular, the red horse, represented by communism. That's why you see the sickle and all that stuff of the Chinese and the Russian symbolism is red. It uses red. It's another. There's another scripture that comes to mind about that the red horse would go and conquer, and it shows the destructive forces of the socialist communist party. We see this in Revelation chapter 6, verse 4. I'm going to just pull it up just so you can see it. Again, I take a more practical view of prophecy, not to mention that these aren't spiritual. Not to say that these aren't spiritual components or actual, visions. But I do think the Father wanted us to know, especially His people, to know the symbolism that was going to be used. apologize, my internet might be down right this second. So I did put it into the verse here. Revelation chapter 6, verse 4, another came forth, a red horse. To him who sat on it was given power to take peace from the earth, and that they should kill one another. Sound like communism and socialism to you? There was given to him a great sword. So you can read into what you want, but if you look at this map, I mean, clearly, the Soviet Union, who is surrounded by China on one side and the Eastern Bloc on the other side, basically has risen up on one side and really waged war on all these countries. We're going to talk more about this when we get to the beast of the Tin Horned Kingdom, because they're going to be connected. But for now, there we go, it finally loaded. So you can see it there in the plain Blue Letter Bible. So there's the next beast is defined as the leopard. Now, the leopard, I think of all of the beasts, is probably one of the more easier ones to identify. So if we look at Daniel chapter 7, verse 6, it says, I saw, and behold, another beast like a leopard came after the bear, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. Okay, 4 wings of a bird. And the beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now, think about this for a minute, because in the traditional view, all of them teach that those kingdoms had dominion. And to a certain extent, they did. But what's interesting is none of the other kingdoms have dominion. So we'll kind of look at what that might mean or represent from the leopard. But if you look at the next nation predicted for the time of Yeshua's return, it's symbolized by the leopard. But it was said about the leopard that dominion was given to it. Now, if you look at, of all these nations, or even the previous nations that are in the traditional view, which nation in the last 100 years has had dominion in world affairs? What do we mean by this? It can't be that the United States, because even though she has had dominion, she's the eagle. That's right. This is not referring to Russia, because Russia is the bear, and certainly Russia, the United States, Great Britain, France, others have 100% dictated world affairs. Okay, so because those other symbols are represented and already identified, that means that the leopard can't represent them. So what does it mean? There is a nation represented by the leopard, however, that has been the world's aggressor and started 3 of the last major wars. We're talking about the Franco-German War of 1870, the World War I, and World War II, and that nation is Germany. And again, going back to what we said, if you envision nations that would be in the earth at the time of Mashiach's return, at the top of my list, United States, Great Britain, possibly France, for certain Germany. No one's going to overthrow these kingdoms at this point. They are too powerful. Short of World War III or Armageddon, no nation is going to be overthrown. We know this historically, both contextually within Scripture as well. So Germany has dominated in Europe for many years now. And we are going to go into some of the history of this, because it helps to identify and set up the 4th beast, the Tin-Horned Kingdom. So Germany has dominated in Europe. It was forced to rebuild, however, after World War II, when it was almost totally destroyed. And Germany is once again dominating Europe. Why do we say that? Because the European Union has become the world's #1 economic power. Germany is by far the strongest country among the nations of the European Union. It is the second largest economy in the world in nominal terms after the United States. And it's the third largest at purchasing power parity. And we'll explain how they got to that level. If you're not familiar with the power presence or the sheer enormity of the German government. But after China and the US, so it's the third largest in purchasing power next to China and the US. Think about that. Germany has the biggest national GDP of all EU, European Union countries, followed by France and then Italy. Okay. And in comparison, there's really no comparison. Um, what's interesting though, the currency, the euro that Germany uses, is the second largest reserve currency, the second most traded currency next to the dollar, which is the world's reserve currency um, uh, on the world stage from a political standpoint. So if we go back to Germany's dominance, had Yahweh not intervened in World War II, we may all be speaking German at this point, not English. Few may know late in the war, and I want to use a story to kind of tie this together, but few may know that late in the war, the German army had the Allied armies, the US, Great Britain, and France, had them trapped. They had them trapped in a pincer movement against the 18-mile wide English Channel, meaning they couldn't escape. The German Blitzkrieg attack was grinding Allied forces into defeat. So what the Germans did is they used special forces to rapidly expand into areas with highly specialized tank warfare and other military means called the Blitzkrieg. Within 3 days, the Allied forces would have been forced to surrender for peace on Hitler's terms within 3 days of this attack. However, on the brink of a great victory, Hitler feared that he was falling into a trap because it was all happening too easily. He ordered his armies to pause, pulling his generals back to command headquarters for reassessment. During this delay in Hitler's attack, the Allied forces strengthened their defenses, and by mobilizing every available boat in Great Britain and France, they were able to evacuate Allied soldiers who would live to fight another day and defeat Hitler. When the operation began, the strategy counted on evacuating only about 45,000 men that they felt like they could save in the 2 days that were allotted for the plan. But because of Hitler's unexpected reassessment order, the Allies were able to rescue 338,000 troops. 338,226 troops. Now, this is like the entire size of an entire army in modern times. Like, they were aided by bad weather, which also kept the German air forces on the ground during much of the operation. And that's why I say, had Yahweh not intervened. When the Allied troops were finally forced to surrender, only about 40,000 Allied soldiers were captured. This became known as the Miracle of Dunkirk. Great movie. Go see it. Now notice in Daniel's writings that the leopard had 4 heads. The traditional view described those 4 heads as the generals of Greece under Alexander the Great. An alternate view would be that these other 3 beasts, these nations of Daniel chapter 7, they only had 1 head each. So in scripture prophecy, a beast we know always represents a nation along with its ruler. Okay. So multiple heads on a beast would represent the number of times that a particular nation will rise and fall. We don't see this with Rome rising again in their symbology. You don't see this with Babylon, and we definitely don't see this with the Medes and the Persians who were conquered. We've talked about this in earlier um, uh, sessions, but we don't need to go back into it. But what this does mean is most likely the four heads, or one way that this could be interpreted is that the four heads of the leopard represent Germany's regimes. We would say kings or emperors, So what Germany uses in their language would be the Reichs. So we have the First Reich, the Second Reich. Of course, you have the Third Reich under Hitler and his regime. And pay close attention to this, the possibility that there's a coming Fourth Reich, the most richest and powerful of them all, which is now rising within the framework of the European Union. And I'll explain more about this. But if we were to look at further clues of symbology, no one would argue that ever since Germany sold its Leopard tanks to the Netherlands, okay, the German Leopard tank, if you don't know, has become the world's foremost tank next to the U.S. Abrams. There are other tanks, of course. There's the Great Britain Challenger. These are all main battle tanks. Remember what I said, that these nations would use this symbolism in their military. Okay, the American Eagle fighter jet. We have the Russian Bear on the tanks of the Soviet tanks. We have the um, uh, um, the Leopard represented by the German uh, nation, and the Leopard tank is probably the most popular tank in the world. Used by none other than NATO. So we have these main battle tanks representing the power of these nations and the symbolism of them. And we know that the armies of NATO, the North American alliance, basically use the Leopard tanks as a defense mechanism against the aggression of Iran and other Middle East threats. So even most recently, those Leopard tanks, now check this out, they were sent to the front lines of the war with Russia and Ukraine. The U.S. also sent some older Abrams, but you have a very important clue here about symbolism in the nations that would be in world authority and world power at the time of Mashiach's return. This is also an example of when we say the Fourth Reich. Pay attention to what happens with Germany, because Germany is not lending Leopard tanks to Ukraine just to be nice. Okay? This is all going to play out and unfold. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that could happen. But something that you need to understand from a historical standpoint is that a lot of current modern day authors, experts that study Nazi or Nazism, again, we're talking about Hitler and the outcrop of Hitler. Did Nazism die? Did the Reich actually die? The Third Reich actually die? Did their beliefs, their political system, their leaders, right? So this idea of a Fourth Reich really coming to fruition today. And the experts believe that the Fourth Reich is currently experiencing a new phase of normalization. So, thanks to all the tumultuous political upheaval throughout the Western world, we can look at many unending conflicts in the Middle East, the continuing crisis of the European Union that have made the prospect of a future Reich highly relevant. In Europe, the prospect of a Fourth Reich is raised by none other than the European Union, those critics on both the left and the right. Some claim Germany has turned the EU into a kind of economic Reich or empire. Even the US across the Atlantic in the United States, the Fourth Reich is invoked by, you're seeing this in recent protests against current presidents and future presidents, some of whose posters and memes do include Nazi imagery. In the past two presidential election cycles, just in the US, it's interesting to see this. Why is that symbolism now coming up as a part of end time events? Well, we can see now that the prophetic words of four heads and Reichs led up to the possibility that there would be a fourth German Reich that would rise again in the place of the first, second, and third. Again, the four heads. We can look to how the US, who has a heart of a man, even the US, after World War II, we did not destroy the Nazi command. We instead, sought to reform them through denazification, period. Now, what this means is there was a period after World War II where you have the Nuremberg trials going on. And during this period, former Nazi supporters were expected to transition from, some authors say it this way, from werewolves to Democrats. It's a joke. But basically, the evil dictators and rulers that they were running the Hitler Empire to somehow become political pundits in a less threatening world that, quite frankly, they split East and West Germany at that point. So that was their way of trying to neutralize the threat of Germany. So the problem with this is we know that key members of Hitler's war party not only were allowed to live, but they also maintained their radical right-wing underground groups called the Deutsche Revolution. Those top-line members included, for example, the Butcher of Lyon, Klaus Barbie, and others that were allowed to live and prosper. And this is crazy. Here's the scary thing. The Deutsche Revolution plans, if they were to be carried out, they were to infiltrate its people among British occupation authorities with the ultimate purpose of convincing Britain to turn against Russia. In return for working against the Russians, the Deutsche Revolution expected to receive, get this, a series of Allied concessions, most notably an end to denazification, the release of the Nazis from internment camps where they were being detained, and the return of Germany's eastern territories from Poland. The return of Germany's eastern territories from Poland, and an end to economic reparations. Is this why Germany gave Leopard tanks to Ukraine to help defeat Russia? The threat posed by the Deutsche Revolution activists and their vision of a Fourth Reich became so acute that the Allies enacted Operation Selection Board. This was a nighttime raid in which several thousand Allied troops fanned out across the western occupation zones in frigid weather to arrest more than 100 suspects associated with the Deutsche Revolution. Many of the radicals who were arrested that night were former SS and Wehrmacht officers from the German SS under Hitler. Again, special forces underneath Hitler, basically driving the war effort and that machine. There were also mid-level bureaucrats or politicians, and the people needed to turn orders into action and who never appeared on trial at Nuremberg or in Jerusalem. I'm saying all this so that you understand that the Fourth Reich is a possibility because the belief system from Hitler's top command wasn't completely crushed. They've been in the earth since World War II, planning, scheming, plotting. And if the fourth head is the Fourth Reich, the fourth rising of the German nation or the kingdom, then we will see more from this nation. Now, a clue of this is this would lead us to the final nation or the kingdom that exists when Yeshua returns. And again, we're going through all this to just say, look, what nations exist at Yeshua's return, and is Israel among them? So I've had to lay a bunch of groundwork to get you through prophetic prophecy just to get you to this point so we can unveil Israel. Okay? The 10-horned beast, Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, is where we're going to go into the final kingdom that's represented in Daniel chapter 7 and talk about this 10-horned beast. Daniel chapter 7, verse 7, right here we can see, after this I saw in the night vision, behold, a fourth kingdom, a fourth beast, awesome and powerful and strong exceedingly. It had great iron teeth. Again, this has been described as Rome. It devoured and broke in pieces and stampeded the residue with its feet. And it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, another king, a little one before which 3 of the king's first horns were plucked by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Here we see Daniel only gives a description of the fourth beast. No name is given, no beast type is given. So no name is given of the animal type, as the beast may not have resembled anything Daniel had ever seen. We can speculate, but clearly he doesn't use anything to describe that beast. Instead, he says that the beast, or what he saw in the vision, was awesome, powerful, and strong exceedingly. Some translations say dreadful, terrible, and strong exceedingly. So we're getting this imagery that he's sharing with us. He says, we can also see the beast's main characteristic is that it has 10 horns. And we know that the beast represents kingdoms, but what about the 10 horns? If we look at Daniel's prophecy in the scripture to define that, we can see it in Daniel chapter 7, 23 and 24. The fourth animal is a fourth kingdom on the earth, which shall be diverse or different from all the other kingdoms, shall devour the whole earth, shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Goes on to say, verse 24, that the 10 horns come out of the kingdom shall be 10 kings that will arise. Another will rise after them. A king will rise after them. He shall be different from the others, and he shall put down the three kings. Clearly, we see now that the horns represent kings or rulers. So from this, we believe we can say that the 10 horns upon one single beast symbolize a union of 10 different kings joining their kingdoms together and forming one great kingdom. Okay. We see another picture of this 10-nation union in Revelation chapter 17, 12, and 14. And keep in mind, Revelation 17, or Revelation, the revelation of Yeshua HaMashiach, that letter by Yochanan, John, was written 700 years after Daniel's prophecy, but they are the one and same vision. And in Revelation 17, 12 through 14, it says that the 10 horns that you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdom as yet. So if you're looking for the kingdoms or the kings, if you're looking for the kings that are part of this kingdom, they won't get their kingdoms until the appointed time, which makes it difficult to interpret or identify who the 10-horn kingdom is. Now, unlike the traditional view, which would say Rome on the 10 represents the 10 kingdoms on the 10 hills and all that, but the scripture's telling us that these kings don't have a kingdom yet, and they won't until the appointed time. It's a really important clue that's kind of left out or skipped over. I don't know. But the other thing about this is that they receive their authority as kings with the beast. And then we're given a time frame of 1 hour. These have one mind. They give their power and authority to the beast. These will war against the Lamb, and the Lamb will overcome them, for he is Adon of Adons, Master of Masters, and King of Kings, or his kingdom is over all kingdoms. They also will overcome who are with him, called, chosen, and those that are, of the belief, right? Pitching tents with Yahweh. We don't say faith, it's chana. Pitching of tents, building a house with the Father. Now, unequivocally, we see that the passage from Revelation refers to the same power as the 10-horn kingdom of Daniel chapter 7, verse 23 and 24. We just read it. But it also reveals a very interesting fact about this power, this kingdom. The kingdom of the 10 horns will be the last kingdom upon the face of the earth prior to the establishment of the kingdom of Elohim by Yeshua HaMashiach. Notice the same as Daniel 7, 25 through 27. These 10 kings make war with the Lamb. Yeshua's kingdom with the Lamb, Yeshua defeats them. See, he will speak words against Ha-Elyon, the Most High, shall wear out the Kodesh ones of the Most High. He shall think to change times and the law, and they shall be given into his hands until a time and times and a half a time. That's 3.5 years. But the judgment shall be set, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it to the end. Now, he shall think to change the times and the law. We started to talk about this in Teachings of the Way, where the Spirit, you've all heard it this way, the Antichrist, or the spirit of the Antichrist, is in the earth already. Where the spirit of the anti-Mashiach, we don't say Christ, the anti-Mashiach, the anti-Messiah, is already at work. And we saw this with the Roman Empire under Catholicism. Constantine and their sun worship, where they sought to convert and change the Shabbat day to Sunday. So they sought to change the times and the law. There's only one law. It's Yahweh's law. Okay? So the law it's referring to is the Father's loving instruction given to us about meeting, congregating, worshiping Him on Shabbat, not on Sunday. And then they went as far as to, and I showed the actual Roman Catholic inscriptions in their writings, how they sought to change Shabbat to Sunday. They didn't. They just convinced believers, careful Christian believers, to follow that path. The way originally was to meet in synagogue on Shabbat, and to come together on Shabbat, is what I mean by that, and to worship the Father on Shabbat. So, whether you meet in a gathering on Shabbat, or you just, as the head of your house, teach your family whatever on Shabbat, that's what the original way represented. No, that was a freebie. We see judgment is then poured out on the dictator who is to reign over the 10 kingdom union. The kingdom is taken from the 10-nation ruler. It's given unto the people, the believers of the Most High, and their kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. In summary, in this prophecy, we are given a very detailed description of the last world power that shall reign over the peoples of the earth immediately before the return of Mashiach, with these other 3 kingdoms. Now, I'm presenting the view that these other 3 kingdoms are not Babylon, Media, Persia, and Greece and Rome as the final Iron Kingdom, but they represent the United States and Great Britain with Russia and Germany. Because those other kingdoms have already been destroyed, done away with in history, and been replaced. So as to who will reign, it's important to understand how the anti-Mashiach may come to power to identify the nations in existence at the time of his kingdom's appearing. Daniel chapter 7, 8, carefully consider the words here. It says, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which of the 3 horns were plucked up by the roots, and behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and the mouth speaking great things. And here we see a world dictator is going to rise up among a 10-nation union. He's symbolized here as the little horn with a mouth speaking great things, who will uproot 3 kings. Again, we can keep reading Daniel chapter 7, verse 21 and 22. I saw as the same horn made war with the dedicated ones and prevailed against them until the Ancient of Days came. Judgment was given to the Kodesh ones of the Most High, the highest one, and the time came that the Kodesh ones possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the 4th beast shall be a 4th kingdom on the earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. So here we see that the anti-Mashiach and his kingdom will rule until the time of Mashiach's return to the earth. Now, there have only been 5 empires that have ruled the world since the time of Daniel. Those include Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, the Roman Empire, and by proxy, the Holy Roman Empire. Now, it's not the focus of this study, but I will go ahead and share with you 3 possibilities of what this kingdom could be. Starting with the most probable. the European Union. In 1957, 6 nations in Europe signed the Treaty of Rome. And remember that this is a 10-nation union. Okay, so it's important to break this down a little bit. But 6 nations in Europe signed the Treaty of Rome. We're talking about how the European Union was formed. We're talking about the role that Germany has in the European Union. And how this could become the final kingdom of the anti-Mashiach. Those 6 nations were Belgium, West Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. So the idea was to create one great nation and ultimately create the United States of Europe. And they did. They patterned the United States of Europe after the United States of America. So we'll talk about that. But after World War II, the nuclear superpowers of the United States and Russia, those two superpowers, nuclear, emerged, and they challenged the European nations in unilateral decision-making in world affairs. So the nations of Europe got tired of this because their word didn't mean anything. And so to compete against these European nations, they formed a collective of people that equaled 400 million to give them the same superpower status and to have a vote in world affairs versus being simply informed of unilateral decision making by these other superpowers. So shortly after it was formed and had early success, in addition to the 6 nations, Belgium, West Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg, and Netherlands, 4 additional nations joined them to equal 10. Great Britain, Ireland, Denmark, and Norway. This raised the total nation count to 10. Okay, now this is kind of shaping up to maybe be the 10-horn kingdom. But remember what I said. They won't be revealed until the time of the end, when the Father is ready for them to have their kingdoms to serve the beast. Okay, so what happened was, shortly after being accepted, the people of Norway, so they were at 10 nations, but shortly after this, the people of Norway, they got upset, and they began to outcry against the political parties and the membership of within the EU. And Norway, as a result, left the EU, taking it back down to 9 members. Okay, back down to 9. So then in 1980, though, Greece was actually granted membership, and it brought the EU back up to 10. Okay, now, as a result, these European countries studied, I call it the supernatural growth of the original 13 American colonies of the founding of the United States, and they modeled their economy, again, the United States of Europe, after the United States of America, and how the colonies grew. And the way that this happened was they basically reduced tariffs and manufacturing restrictions against each other so that there was free trade. That free trade allowed them to build what was called the European Common Market. They then adopted a common currency called the euro. Okay. At this point, this 10-nation union would be important and would follow the 10-horned beast in Daniel and in Revelation. Now, the problem with this is major changes would need to occur to change the current status of the European Union, which sits today at 27 member states. Okay, so we would have to go from 27 back down to 10. So, and at first this was like we didn't think that this was possible. But what happened in 2020 was that Great Britain, and you may have heard this term, they uh, uh, there was what was called the Brexit. So the British exit from the European Union. So we started to see nations start to leave the European Union again, and maybe that will continue to take it back down to 10. And then at that time, the kingdom of the beast is in power. We don't know yet. We have to watch. So we thought that the Brexit, though, may be the start uh, of this exodus from the European Union to get them back down to the 10 nation states that were originally a part of uh, the 10 nation union. Now, the interesting thing here is if we go back to who is Israel, and let's say in that thought pattern, we're considering Great Britain as Israel, then almost certainly Great Britain would have had to broken off from the EU so that they were not a part of the judgment against the beast in the end time. So, but the reality is that the EU has exploded into an economic powerhouse, a unique economic political union between 27 European countries. Now, what's interesting about this is if you study it, this part of Europe, remember the original six? This is historically the center of the Holy Roman Empire. So we're bleeding back in the traditional view of the Holy Roman Empire being revived and all that, but it's an interesting fact that the European, this historical center of these EU states is the center of the Holy Roman Empire. Anti-Mashiach will rule a revived Holy Roman Empire, and I say that way on purpose, according to Scripture. Or anti-Mashiach will rule a revived anti-Mashiach kingdom that's always been in existence, according to Scripture. So, an example of this, and again, I don't think it's coincidental, but an example of this is when the first coin of the European Union, the ECU, was printed in 1987. So, what they did was printed their own currency. That coin actually featured the image of Charlemagne as its image and its inscription. And if you don't know, it's not a coincidence that Charlemagne was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire that was crowned under Pope Leo III in 800 AD. And when I throw these AD numbers out here, the easiest way to keep this straight in your mind is that in the 300s, you had Constantine. Okay, so you have the way the original belief working out in, of course, 1 AD, but you start to really see popularity in 10 AD, 20 and 30 AD, 10, 20, 30 years after Mashiach's death and resurrection. And then you start to see these other governments or empires start to come into historical context of what we see in terms of Constantine in the 300s and the changes to Shabbat and things like that by the Roman Empire under their belief system. Another possible, and I need to say this because are the leaders of the European Union seeking to rebuild the Holy Roman Empire? This is just one example of that. Another possibility, you don't really hear a lot about this, but I've started to talk about Russia and the bear, that this beast could be a recreated Soviet Union. And another power that could become the Tin Horn Kingdom is the recreated Soviet Union. Many, and this is often overlooked, but many of the states of the ex-Soviet Union are unhappy with their loss of superpower status when Russia fell, when the USSR fell. There has been discussion that if 10 of the states would come together, they would immediately regain superpower status, 400 million. Add to that all the nuclear weaponry that kept the world in fear for 40 years during the Cold War, and the fact that many of these states were also part of the Holy Roman Empire, it's not hard to believe that this could actually come to pass. Now, some Bible prophecy scholars believe it will be Russia, represented as Gog or Magog, that will ultimately lead the United Nations invasion of Israel at the final battle of Armageddon. Now, try to wrap your head around that. You know, try to wrap your head around this, okay? Look at the lack of support for Russia invading Ukraine recently. And then try to wrap your head around Russia leading some kind of coalition with the United Nations against who? Israel. You have to define who Israel is. Is it that tiny little country of 10 million? And he proxies it through Iran and Saudi Arabia, not Saudi Arabia, Iran and Syria. Okay. That's a possibility. But this is one that definitely is a possibility, right? Putting together the old Soviet Union into a 10-member nation, they certainly have the power and the reputation to be this type of a kingdom. And then finally, a more popular one would be the Arabic Union. I struggle with this one, candidly, but we'll talk about it. So, just in the interest of being unbiased, the last possibility is more remote, but should not be ignored. There are 10 Palestinian leaders in the Middle East already. And until now, they have opposed Israel and Hamas peace agreements, with the exception of some Palestinian leaders. Yasser Arafat was one of them. He actually acknowledged Israel's right to exist, at least publicly, and sought a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We know this because he worked directly with Yitzhak Rabin, the late great Prime Minister of Israel. Now, when you talk about an Arabic Union as being the beast, what's interesting is that recently we had the Abraham Accords, and of the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, those kingdoms and those nations, and Israel, they signed a historic agreement in September 2020 that has transformed the Middle East, and I'll explain why I say that. The Abraham Accords have led to new forms of cooperation in the Middle East and beyond. So, as part of the two agreements, both the UAE and Bahrain, they recognize Israel's sovereignty, enabling the establishment of full diplomatic relations. Israel's initial agreement with the UAE marked the first instance of Israel establishing diplomatic relations with an Arab country since 1994. Now, when the Israeli-Jordan peace treaty came into effect. So the agreements were named the Abraham Accords to highlight the common belief of Judaism and Islam in the prophet Abraham. In 2020, Israel and Sudan also agreed to normalize ties. As part of the agreement, the U.S. removed Sudan from its list of state-sponsored terrorism. Again, we're going back to the heart of a man type nation. You see this in the news all the time, and you're like dumbfounded, like, why is Biden, Obama paying Iran billions of dollars and lifting sanctions in the middle of the worst travesties of this nation against Israel? Like, again, the U.S., the heart of a man, they believe they're doing what's right and trying to negotiate peace at the same time keep Iran from getting a nuke. They genuinely believe that they're doing what's right, but they represented the nation of the United States, like it or not. So considering that of most recent April of 2024, Iran attacked Israel directly for the first time since it was formed as a nation in 1948, we saw other nations besides the United States, Britain, France, including the nations of Saudi Arabia and Jordan, defending Israel, a 10-member union, will definitely be one to watch for. You know, is the Abraham Accords something um, just a catalyst or the catalyst to start that 10-member union from an Arabic standpoint? Consider for a moment, for the first time in U.S. history, that we have Arab Muslims in the street cheering Iran after they just launched the first direct attack against Israel since 1948. Over 300 drones, cruise missiles, um, things still classified coming out, uh, long range missiles. They launched in a direct attack at Israel. It's not a wonder that this one could play out the way that some Bible scholars have kind of positioned it, meaning that the whole world could turn against Israel. The whole world could embrace some form of Islam. I mean, we have an entire, you know, um, Gen Z. Um, I think it's Gen Z, basically. I would just say like 35 and below, something like that. That have embraced this. Hey, uh, uh, social media craze about uh, supporting Hamas and now Iran against the atrocious attacks of Israel, uh, most recently the worst since the Holocaust. So it really just boils down to, uh, the old saying, "Are you ready for a new world order?" Right? Um, you know, I think what I'll do is go ahead and break here. It got a little long. Um, or maybe we should just go ahead and finish it and then do the unveiling of Israel afterwards. So yeah, let's go ahead and finish it. This will be a long one. I apologize. Revelation 13, 1 and 2. I stood on the sand of the sea. I saw a beast coming out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads. On his horns were 10 crowns, on his heads blasphemous names. The beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like those of a bear, and his mouth like the mouth of a lion. Now the dragon gave him his power, his throne, and great authority. And there's a lot that we could symbolize here, but I think that I've done a pretty good job of showing you that from Germany, the Holy Roman Empire, those nations could be a part of this. Even from USSR, from the old Soviet states that were part of the Holy Roman Empire could also be a part of this. And then also um, the mouth of a lion. This is the challenge. This is a challenging one, in that this would have something to do with Great Britain as a mouthpiece. Certainly, Great Britain, like Germany, is helping to lead uh, the uh, the East. I'll say it that way. Um, the other thing too, where you have Germany and the bear, not so much Germany, but the bear, you have the symbolism of the dragon. Easily, China is represented by the dragon. Um, Not to mention, Hashatan, Satan, but easily this dragon gave the bear its power. Russia doesn't do anything without China first. So there's a lot of symbolism here that's being thrown out. And it truly is amazing. 700 years after the writings of Daniel, where he's exiled on the island of Patmos. He's given a vision of the same beasts that are in Daniel chapter 7. The only difference is that those beasts we see, 4 beasts, we still see the same 4 beasts, but in Revelation 13, we see one beast that is a conglomerate of them all. We also see that this beast has most all the characteristics of the beast of Daniel chapter 7, with the exception of the eagle. The eagle is nowhere to be found. What we learn about this kingdom is that it has the body of the leopard, Germany, the feet of the bear, Russia, and the mouth of the lion, possibly Great Britain. The 10 horns of the 10-horn kingdom, the 10-nation alliance of the anti-Mashiach, and then we don't see any mention of the eagles or the eagle's wings. So we're clearly describing the merging of Great Britain, possibly Russia, Germany, and the 10-nation union into one great world government, creating the kingdom and of the anti-Mashiach. We can see the beast has 7 heads, which equal the total number of heads of the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7. That includes the lion had 1, the bear had 1, the leopard had 4, and the 10-horn beast, the head of the 10-horn beast. They all total 7. And we know that those beasts represent a nation. And now I think we can see, right, that these nations are united together. They're united in a single kingdom and one great government. We call it like this one world power. Stop for a minute, though. Imagine that you live in 1968 at the height of the Cold War. Can you ever imagine that Russia would have veto power and a seat at the table of civilized nations, much less that Great Britain, Russia, Germany, other European countries would ever come together to form a European Union, a world government, a type of superpower? On March 29th, 1968, Life magazine published an article titled 3 1/2 Superpowers to Rule the World. In this article, we saw U.S. Undersecretary of State George Ball. He proposed a world government very much like what the prophecy describes. We have lived to see this prophecy come to pass in the forming of the United Nations. He wrote each side can afford to give room to the other outside Europe, where the division festers like a rusty knife wound must someday be healed. Again, when I say that these news articles and major print articles with imagery are prophetic, look at the imagery that's being used. The wound, not to mention the mentioning of the beasts or the nations through symbolism. Notice that the prophecy states that the mouth of the beast will be the mouth of the lion. Again, if the lion's Babylon, as we're told, that means this world system will speak Aramaic as its language, not English. And this is the thing that I say that, no, Great Britain won't be a part of the beast's kingdom. This verse is really saying that another clue that the Father is giving us, if this was Babylon, this kingdom of the beast would speak Aramaic. It wouldn't speak English. And that's what it means by the mouth of the lion. Of course, the English language, which comes from the Latin and the Greek to form the English, is what it's talking about as far as the United Nations adopting English as its official language. So we have the government, the one world government, adopting English as its official language. Again, I'm more practical. Sorry, guys. I'm just more practical in terms of how I interpret scripture and the voices that I listen to about prophecy in some of these areas. So after all, you can't have a world government without a common language. This is why English is a requirement as a second language in many schools around the globe. It's also the universal language from the merging of Latin, Roman, and Greek languages. We talked about that in previous sessions. Now, what happened to the eagle's wings? At the end of World War I, the League of Nations was formed in an attempt to ensure that another war would never be fought. But the United States feared such an alliance and its entanglements against its sovereignty and was forced to decline participation, rendering the League of Nations useless. We didn't join. However, at the end of World War II, the nations of the world once again joined in a united effort to end all wars by establishing the United Nations. It's important to understand that the key members of the United States helped form the United Nations. One of those key members was Alger Hiss. He served under President Franklin Roosevelt. Hiss not only organized the American delegation for the first charter of the United Nations, but also served as the acting Secretary General at the first UN meeting in San Francisco. It wasn't in New York. And in fact, Hiss was responsible for developing that UN charter. Now, Hiss served under President Roosevelt. Okay. And on the surface, it would look like the United States is a part of this union, United Nation Union. If you dig further, though, what's not well known is that previous to Alger Hiss serving Roosevelt as his advisor, he was also in the Yalta Conference, where this conference is where Europe was carved up by the United States after World War II. Remember what I said about who has dominion? The United States has dominion. Remember, the United States, Great Britain, decided who would get the land of Israel, the nation of Israel, the land. Going back to this, at the time, Roosevelt was a dying man. Okay? Roosevelt was a dying man, and he let Alger Hiss, lead the negotiations for the United States, but unknown to anyone at the time, he was also a communist spy. I mean, it took us 3 years to catch him, but by then the damage was done. In the end, Russia, who was at the Yalta Conference, seeking to negotiate the final terms of what would happen with Germany and the Eastern European countries. What happened was, because Hiss was a communist spy, Hiss was able to work behind the scenes, and because Roosevelt was, kind of a lot like Biden right now, not cognitively there because he was dying, and just not able to perform as the president, Hiss actually ran all the negotiations. So as a result, man, at the end of World War II, we see Russia got a lot of concessions that shocked a lot of people. That's because they had their own spy agent, Hiss, doing the negotiations. Now notice, and I'm sharing the symbolism here. I'll try to blow it up and share it as well. But if you look at the Soviet Union emblem, which is the one here on the left in orange with the yellow sheathing, if you look at that symbol, that is a globe with 2 sheaves of wheat around it. Okay? It has a hammer and it has a sickle, and here's the globe. I want you to compare that symbolism to the United Nations emblem. And notice it's the exact same without the sickle and the hammer. You see the wheat sheaves on the outside and the globe in the center. Of course, a star is missing the red star for communism and socialism. This is the symbolism used for the United Nations. Now look, you don't need to look further to the record of the UN to understand how the UN votes. Okay? It has overwhelmingly favored socialist nations in their causes, and it has openly fought against capitalism and democracy. Look at the most recent votes of Israel against Israel to stop the war in Hamas and to not retaliate against Iran, who directly attacked a sovereign nation. Most recently, paraphrasing, they sided with Iran and the Palestinian authorities under Hamas after horrific crimes against Israel and their people. Now, one of the things that comes up a lot about this anti-Mashiach is the wound. That somehow he's going to die and he's going to rise again. And I find this funny when you study this out. So we're going to close and just talking about this wound, but will the anti-Mashiach be wounded and rise from the dead? This is why I try to keep a more practical view of Scripture a lot of times and take it at face value more than others. But truly, look at this from Revelation chapter 13. One of his heads looked like it had been wounded fatally. His fatal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled at the beast. Now, some wild attempts trying to understand this verse. Many scholars teach that the anti-Mashiach will be killed, raised from the dead. So to understand this, let's look closer, because it says one of his 7 heads was wounded. The question we have to ask is which one of the 7 heads were wounded and when? Because remember, the 7 heads are made up of the kingdoms. Okay? We know Germany was the only kingdom that had multiple heads. So Germany had 4 heads, unlike the other beasts who had 1 head. So it wouldn't apply to the other beasts because Germany is the only one with multiple heads in this scenario. Germany has plunged the world into war 3 times in the last 70 years. Okay, and as a result, the U.S. decided after World War II that the U.S., Great Britain, France, and Russia decided to divide Germany. They split them. Half went to the east and half went to the west. This created the dividing of Germany and Europe, and it created the Berlin Wall. And this was in order to reduce the size of the population of Germany so that they couldn't rise up. Remember the Fourth Reich? They couldn't rise up to create another union to create a Fourth Reich to fight a world war again. Now, by dividing up Germany, it created the Berlin Wall, and then we see that East Germany went to the control of Russia, and West Germany went to the control of the U.S., Great Britain, and France. And then it was declared at that time that Germany is dead. She will never rise again. These statements were said of the Third Reich, depicted in the prophecies by the 3rd head of the leopard. So if we go back to the statements of George Ball, the Undersecretary of the United States, he was saying each side can afford to give room. He was saying how Germany was split, east and west. Each side can afford to give room to the other outside Europe, where the division, the wound that festers like a rusty knife, wound must someday be healed. In USA Today, August 14, 1986, describes the Berlin Wall, the splitting of Europe, as the 29-mile wound that won't heal. It's not a coincidence. In the November 20th, 1989 issue of Time magazine, the article wall of shame described the Berlin Wall like this: it was the most palpable evidence of a deep wound in European civilization, and it is finally gone. On November 9th, 1989, the Berlin Wall did come down, and soon after, East and West Germany were reunited and healed. From that moment on, three world leaders began pushing the New World Order: Pope John Paul II, President Mikhail Gorbachev of Russia, and President George Bush of the United States, aided by Secretary Dick Cheney. Naturally, we can say this because George Bush, the president, George Bush Sr., the president, was working with Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall. Challenged Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down the wall and restore the union of Europe between East and West Germany. The scripture teaches us that in Revelation that the whole world, the whole earth marveled at the beast. It was at this time that this event would cause the whole world to follow the one world government beast over which the anti-Mashiach will rule. Now, for this mini study on prophecy, I need to thank my long-term favorite prophecy interpreter, Irvin Baxter of End Time Ministries. I'm sharing a link here for you guys. I do want you to know something some may or may not know, but the Father gave Irvin some insight. Because I'm listing articles from '68 and from 1980 and things like that before my time, right? So, well, I was born in '78, but the Father gave him insight, and he wrote a book. And I do consider him to be a true prophet because he wrote a book called A Message to the President in 1968 that he shared with the president in 1968. And in that book, he predicted the fall of the Berlin Wall. And he did it through some of the scriptures that I'm sharing with you. Naturally, the Ruach HaKodesh, Yahweh's presence, spirit, inspired that work. But his son, I think, continues to spread some of these, I call them truths, within their ministry. And I'll point out they have a really heart for Israel. Their plans are to when the anti-Mashiach stands up in Israel, to flood Israel with pamphlets that explain a lot of biblical prophecy to those that are living in Israel. And they just have a heart for Israel, so I was always connected to their ministry. They are considered a Christian ministry. Again, the Father uses us the way He desires to. Now, when we come back together, we are gonna 100% start with who I believe. All of this context, all of these details, all of this scripture is going to identify the blessing of Jacob, is going to identify Israel, the nation, the people, once and for all. Thank you. Look forward to connecting.